Three R's have dominated this year's Davos. What are these three R's? Russia, recession, and rates. Not necessarily used by everybody in that order. I'm putting this order because I do think that Russia it is that leads to the other two. Because Russia is it played a great Russia, not as in the country itself, but the war involving Russia has played a great role in global recession. Although there are other factors, there is also the question of rates, which is linked to inflation and rising inflation, particularly food inflation now with food grains, edible oil, sunflower oil. That has come as a direct consequence of the war that has followed Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So three R's. You might ask me, where is Russia in this year's Davos? That's a very good question, and that's a question a lot of people might ask because in the discussions, Russia was absent. Russia was absent simply because for this year, Davos World Economic Forum decided to boycott Russia. So they decided to follow the full-on sanctions on Russia. So Russia was even out of the intellectual discussion. So there were no Russian think tankers, there were no Russian scholars, forget Russian officials. And even the friends of Russia who depend on Russia, say for example Iranian foreign minister was here, but he was very cagey. He did not criticize Russia, but he did not say a word in defense of Russia. In fact, he said the war is bad and that Iran is willing to offer its good offices for negotiations and for sorting out the crisis. So Russia was out. Where do we find Russia in Davos? Look right behind me. Look at the background. That's the reason I'm standing here on the promenade. Although it's a noisy place with a lot of traffic, we can't stop traffic. Those kinds of things, as you can see, some top bureaucrats can do in the city of Delhi. You've seen the story in the Indian Express of the guy who would turn everybody out of the stadium because he had to walk his dog. Although I must say I feel sorry for the dog. It's cruel on the dog because if the dog is walking on a synthetic track, how does it do the doggy things like sniffing, like scratching, and where are the bushes for it to pee in? But that besides, this is the promenade. I'll come back to the subject. So Russia Crime House. Right behind me is something called Russia Crime House. Every year, customarily, this was the Russian house. This was full of joy, cheer, and spilling over with vodka. In fact, if around this time, that's about 4:30 in the afternoon, if walking past the promenade, you walked into Russian house and said you were thirsty and asked for a glass of chilled water, they told you, no, we don't give anybody water. We can give you a glass of chilled champagne, and then you could down as many shots as you wished. And those shots were measured not by you or not by a usual barman. Those were all done by the Russians. So that building has now been converted into Russia Crime House. That tells you how the opinion of Russia has changed at this point in Europe. And we spoke about it earlier. Now, in the discussions here, because so many key people were around, so many Gyanis were around, there was a lot of discussion on where the war stands right now. And that's the interesting thing. And I will talk about that. Before that, I will tell you the three key questions that have been raised. Number one, where is Russia? That means, where does Russia stand in whatever is going on? Number two, where will Russia be after the war? Good question, because one day the war will end. One side may win or the other, or there might be some kind of a compromise with both sides declare victory. Whatever happens, one day the war will end. All wars end finally. Where will Russia be when the war ends? Number three, what is the future of Putin? Now that of course will depend on the answer to the second question. How does this war end? Can Putin declare some kind of face-saving victory and say, oh, this is all I want you to achieve. I didn't want a regime change in Kiev, although his government said clearly that they wanted to denazify, etc., etc. But will he then just say that just because he's captured the Azov regiment in Mariupol, he's denazified? He could have said this already. So we don't know. So the three questions: where is Russia? Where will Russia be after the war? And what is the future of Putin? Now, if you look at the war itself, you can see that the war has entered the second phase. The first phase was a defeat for Russia, because the first phase looked like Russia was going straight for Kiev, They had all these tanks and convoys lined up, then they got shot up, and then they made a very damaging retreat. Damaging also because in retreat they were ambushed constantly and they lost a lot of equipment. In fact, at this point, the count on Oryx Oscent site with pictures and videos is that Russia has crossed losses of 700 tanks already. Second phase, however, this phase, which has now entered its 4 months, 90 days have just ended, it's entered its fourth month. This phase doesn't seem to be going as badly for the Russians, for the simple reason that now we are in the situation of a more conventional war, where the two armies have a clear contact line where they are fighting each other. There is a defensive line that Ukraine is defending and the Russians are attacking. So this is more like a conventional war situation. And there the Russians bring to bear their numbers, their ability to take casualties and bash on regardless. So in many places, particularly in an area called Popasna, and you will see it on the map, it's quite critical because if the Russians break through there, one, they cut off a critical railway and highway, and second, they get behind the Ukrainian forces in a large salient of Donbass. And once any force is encircled, that becomes problematic for the defender. So Russians have made some progress, grinding progress, but some progress, and everybody suffers fatigue. Ukrainians are suffering fatigue. So again, there is a wider admission here that Ukrainians at this point are falling back. Number two, the next point, in spite of this, in spite of the fact that Russians might be making some progress now, there's a general view that Ukrainians will not give in, that they will fight on however long it takes. So this will not be some kind of a spectacular capitulation at one point of the kind we saw from Ghani's army in Afghanistan. If not in the beginning, Putin might have thought that maybe 3 months later at some point this will happen, but doesn't look like that's the understanding here, or predominantly the understanding here. But you also know that those who are discussing it and debating it here are on one side. They are against Russia and they are with Ukraine. So there might be a bit of wishful thinking there, but that is the general sense. The next point is new voices have now begun to emerge. So what is Putin Putin calculating? Putin is calculating that at some point the West will get tired. Europe will get tired. America will also get tired, particularly with the midterm elections coming in and Biden's not doing very well. So Putin thinks that if he can bide his time and keep on making grinding progress meanwhile, then ultimately he will tire the West out. What is the West thinking? The West is thinking that Putin is taking losses, although by the way, in the second phase of the war, his losses have come down. His daily casualties have come down. His daily tank losses have also come down because it's more of a conventional, even war where numbers matter a lot more than they did when he was facing a kind of urban guerrilla warfare. Now, Western world thinks at some point he will tire out, or some point his friends or his people will get tired of him, thinking that he is doing too much damage to Ukraine, and they will pull the plug on him. So both sides are fighting for time. But from the West, other voices have already begun to emerge. From Russia, it's tough for voices to emerge. First of all, Henry Kissinger. Henry Kissinger spoke here, and he said quite clearly that Ukraine should accept sacrifice of some territory and make peace with Russia, because otherwise Ukraine will get destroyed. That immediately drew a lot of criticism, as did almost perfectly timed with that Kissinger statement interview at Davos, that perfectly coincided with the New York Times editorial. So editorial board of the New York Times also pretty much said the same thing. They said that, look, Russia is too strong. Ukraine should make a painful compromise because there is futility of taunting Russia. Even America should stop taunting Russia, and basically that Ukraine should not have overconfidence, and Russia is too strong to lose. That's why they should make a compromise with Russia. It will be a painful compromise, lose some territory, but compromise. That has drawn a sharp response from the Ukrainian side, and I shared with you also, just as I shared with you the New York Times editorial. Also, I shared with you the editorial in the Kyiv Independent, which is an answer to the New York Times editorial. So these two are interesting readings. The next point, however, is which is something that the Ukrainians point out that look, Russians are doing it in this place. Suppose somebody was doing it in your neighborhood, but at the same time, the argument on the anti-Western side, there is no pro-Putin side, but anti-Western side is that look, what is Putin doing? You were getting into his pocket borough, you were getting into his neighborhood. So he is responding to that. What if tomorrow, say in the days, or what if yesterday, in the days of the Cold War, Mexico said they want to be a member of Warsaw Pact? What would the Americans have done at that point? But then again, in international relations, might is right, jiski lathi uski bhais, and some of that is happening right now. Now, there is plenty other reading. So there is an article, there is this article in Foreign Affairs, which I am sharing with you. And this is an article written by Anders Aslund. He's a Swedish expert and a senior fellow at Stockholm Free World Forum. In this article, he says that Putin's defeat is inevitable, and the world should then be prepared to deal with a defeated, unstable Russia for some time. And of course, he is hoping grandly at the end of the article that with Putin's departure, maybe a more democratic government will come in, and maybe at that point, Russia's economy can pick up and be reconstructed. Maybe this is also his recommendation that with a new Marshall Plan to rebuild Russia. Now that is far away. You know, if wishes were horses, or if wishes were Patriot missiles or Javelin missiles, then those things would look inevitable. But right now, there is no inevitability to any of that. There is also a comparison with Russia's past defeats. 1905 Russo-Japanese War, that is the war that the Tsar Nicholas launched because he wanted a Pacific pole. And that war went on for quite some time. And he lost that war comprehensively. That was a big national humiliation. That led to the revolution and end of the Tsarist Empire. And later in 1939-40 was also Stalin's, again, unwise and disastrous invasion of Finland, which failed. So this author thinks that that is also the predominant view in this place among analysts. Again, there's a lot of wishful thinking behind it, that ultimately Putin will end up like Tsar Nicholas 1905 or Stalin in 1939-40. Again, if that happens, what will happen to Putin, right? That was our third question. What is the future of Putin? So this article says, and again that's a view, that Putin's personal security is very strong. So possibility of a coup or somebody doing something to him is very, very low. He takes care of that. But the fact is that at some point, other people in power around him, today looks like he's the only one. But Russia also has a National Security Council. National Security Council equivalent called Russian Security Committee. In fact, even more than National Security Council, this would be the equivalent of India's Cabinet Committee on Security. Now that is supposed to meet once a week, but that hasn't met now for a long time. In the past 2 years, it has met only once, and that was 21st of February. So maybe I was wrong in saying it hasn't met for a long time. For a long time, it hasn't met once a week. So in 2 years, it had only one meeting. That was Feb 21. That meeting was held so Putin could take his security committee's clearance for launching war on Ukraine. And we saw this on TV, and that's where he ticked off his intelligence chief. That was a big show. So once again, there is a lot of debate on whether that committee will come back to life and somehow people will get together and get Putin out. But if that doesn't happen, then Putin's fate would depend entirely on how this war ends. Nobody knows this better than Putin. That's why his forces are going to grind on now and keep an eye on this part of the map of Ukraine, because that is where big operations right now is. The Russian forces are coming in on the two sides and they're trying to slam the trap shut behind the Ukrainians in this enclave of Donbass.